Some of the children in this hospital ward traveled for weeks to get here after being shot, knifed, or hit by shrapnel in the ongoing war in Ethiopia's Tigray region. 15-year-old Bariha Gebre has lost one eye and is permanently blind in the other.
She and her cousin went out to play in the yard. Suddenly, they saw people running. They also ran and they were both shot.
It took Gabre weeks to get to this hospital in the regional capital, Makala, as they traveled from town to town, trying to find a clinic to treat her. He says everywhere he went, he found health centers destroyed and looted. After the fighting stopped, the nurse for this clinic in Edega Hamas returned to find a burnt-out tank, bullet-riddled signs, and dead soldiers on the streets. Like so many others, her clinic was empty.
Just 2 weeks ago, Wagitut Sade was preparing for her son Zinawi's operation. He was born with a cleft lip, which has affected his ability to drink milk and along with it, his health. But just days before they were due to return to Mekelle, the capital of Ethiopia's northern Tigray region, the situation changed dramatically.
When we were due to go back for his last checkup before the operation, the fighting started. All the roads were blocked and we couldn't get to Mekelle. People were being killed and there were bombs being dropped, so I fled with him and my family. Now we can't even get a doctor to check on him. We can't even get him his vaccination, let alone have hope he'll get an operation here.
The family now resides at this refugee camp in El-Fashaga in Sudan's Gadaref state. There are more than 15,000 Ethiopian refugees here in what was once a largely uninhabited area. Thousands more Ethiopians have fled to neighboring Kassala state to escape the fighting in Tigray.
Stories are eerily similar. Soldiers come to their homes, demanding to know the whereabouts of a husband, father, or brother, insisting they are rebel fighters. They attack the wife, daughter, or sister. VOA spoke with survivors and is protecting their identity.
They pointed a gun at me and shouted, "We know your father is a fighter. Give us his guns."
I told them that I didn't know where my husband went.
They threw my baby girl on a mat, and the three took turns raping me. My baby cried the whole time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody else. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our second webinar. It is part of 4 webinars planned to coincide with the first anniversary of the genocidal war launched on Tigray last year, November. The webinars are organized by Makata Tigray UK and Tigray Youth Network, known as TYN. My name is Jerusalem Barnabas. I'm a member of Makata Tigray UK and one of the organizing team of the webinars. Makata Tigray UK is a young association that was incepted during the advent of COVID-19, at the time when the Ethiopian government refused to provide personal protection equipment, PPE, to Tigray. That was followed by the refusal of insecticide spray when Tigray had a swarm of desert locusts at the beginning of 2020 and after. Makata Tigray UK is an open, all-inclusive and democratic platform for all ethnic Tigrayans across the UK. Likewise, Tigray Youth Network, known as TYN, which is a partner in this webinar, also emerged in the aftermath of Tigray's war. TYN is a collective of Tigrayan youth, which has been one of the vanguard movements in the plight to stop the war on Tigray. It's also advocating for the rights and self-determinations of Tigrayans. Both Makata and TYN are part of the global campaigns of Tigrayans in the diaspora. In today's seminar, we will listen the living testimonies and stories of different countries and communities that experienced genocide, which we are privileged to listen. Last week, we were fortunate to have 2 fantastic moderators, Martin Plaut and Dr. Fiona Meehan, and we thank them all for that. Today, I would like to welcome to our distinguished moderators who would facilitate our event. We have renowned Professor Mukesh Kapila and the prominent young activist Rowena Kasai. Professor Mukesh Kapila is a professor now emeritus of Global Health and Humanitarian Affairs at the University of Manchester, UK. Since 2020, a senior advisor to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, a principal forum for 29 national parliaments of the Euro-Mediterranean region. He also serves as an advisor on several international bodies, including on the Strategic and Technical Advisory Group for the Antimicrobial Resistance for the World Health Organization. He is an author, a writer, public and media speaker with extensive experience in global health, humanitarian affairs, conflict and security, international development, human rights and diplomacy. His qualification in medicine, public health and development from the University of Oxford in London. He has served in senior leadership position at UK government, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the United Nations, World Health Organization, and International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Professor Mukesh Kapila has advised multitudes of institutions, including the World Bank and UN agencies and international NGOs. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in 2016. Among his many awards is the CBE, a highest achievement award from Her Majesty, a Global Citizenship Award from Institute of Global Leadership, the Eyewitness Award for Human Rights and Special Resolution of the California State Legislature for Lifetime Achievements and Meritorious Service. His first memoir, Against the Tide of Evil, was also shortlisted for the 2013 for the Best Non-Fiction Book Award. His further book in 2019 is entitled Not a Stranger to Kindness. If anyone is interested, his writings can be sampled on his blog site, Flesh and Blood. Professor Kapila is an astonishing man. I'll take a whole day if I have to say about him. We feel honored that he agreed to speak last week and to moderate this week. We are also proud to have one of our youngest activists to be a moderator this week. That is Rowena Kasai. Rowena Kasai is born and educated in the UK from proud Tigrayan parents, educated to a master's degree in international development and rights. She also worked within international development arena. Currently, Rowena is a grant officer for a UK charity. She also tirelessly campaigned against the war in Tigray. She is one of the organizing team members of this webinar and a prominent activist within Tigray Youth Network. Rowena has been interviewed, also spoken in various platforms since the war started in Tigray. She is a fierce advocate to end the war on Tigray, collaborating with similar advocacy groups across the diaspora. Now, before I pass you to our distinguished moderators, I would like to inform you that this week is a Remembrance Week. Sorry. Okay. It is a Remembrance Week in the UK and the Commonwealth. That is to honor those who died on duty during First World War. Taking the occasion, I would also like to pay tribute to all those who lost their lives in this unimaginable genocidal war in Tigray. Similarly, I would like to remember those who have been fallen victims to extrajudicial killing, weaponized sexual violence, deliberate and forced starvation, displacement, exile, and incarceration and destruction. Our thoughts are with those Tigrayans who are currently suffering from reprisal raids, murder, detention by hate-filled neighborhood vigilantes, as well as the state in Addis Ababa and many parts of Ethiopia. During the Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler told his chief Gestapo architect, Henry Himmler, like this: "It's not enough for the Jews just to die. They must die in agony." Ladies and gentlemen, the chief architects of this war, with their collaborators, are making sure Tigrayans to live also die in agony. For that, let's have a 1-minute silence. Professor Mukesh and Rowena, welcome. The forum is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerusalem, for these flattering words of introduction, and most importantly, for also reminding us that this happens to be the time of the year when in many, many countries, those who gave their lives to overcome evil in the Second World War and also the First World War are remembered. And the importance of remembrance is that if we do not remember, we are doomed to repeat. And I remember actually visiting Rwanda some nearly 20 years after I first saw Rwanda in '94 during the genocide. And I couldn't bear to go back. And finally, the Rwandan government insisted I should return to see the changes. And I got back some 20 years later, and virtually every town and village in Rwanda was a memorial. You know, there were little shrines to the hundreds of thousands, to the million or so people who actually died in that particular genocide. So I think your words on remembrance are extremely important in terms of both remembering the past, remembering the present, and connecting the past and the present. Now, the other kind of reflection I wanted to make before we get on to the business is that genocide is a big word. And it's a word that often is used by lawyers, policymakers, and often leaves people behind because most people cannot get their head around what it actually means in a way. Well, you can read all about it. There are definitions of it, and there is always a controversy on whether a particular situation constitutes a genocide or not a genocide. However, that is not a consolation to anyone actually caught within the suffering, as we saw from the clip which you used to introduce this particular session. Again, a genocide to me is a bit trying to describe a genocide beyond the legal definition of it is a bit like trying to describe an elephant. I mean, we all know what an elephant looks like, but try asking someone how to actually describe an elephant, and then you will see that it's not that simple. They can describe the trunk, the limbs, how big it is, how heavy it is, and yet all of that will not capture the concept of an elephant. And then what do you do with those people who have never seen an elephant in their life? So when we talk about genocide, it's a bit like that. If you have never actually seen one, if you have never actually been in one, and if you don't have the imagination to imagine yourself in that experience, or the empathy to relate to someone who suffered from those experiences, how can we expect you to actually kind of be concerned about that? So that's why I'm very pleased that this particular seminar, part of your seminar your program of 4 seminars, is about hearing some voices from other genocides. So we have voices today from Rwanda, from Darfur, and from Srebrenica, directly and indirectly joining us. Because it's only when you listen directly to the voices of those who are caught up in a genocidal atrocity that you can begin to comprehend the magnitude and the uniqueness of what this phenomenon is, in a way. And one thing one can say from my own experiences of having visited all these places, often during the genocide itself, certainly in Rwanda, in Darfur, and also in Srebrenica, but also having seen the aftermath in places like Cambodia. One thing one can say is that there is a commonality in the experiences that happen to people that are caught up in these terrible circumstances. This is not about what technology is used to kill people. This is not about the specifics. It is about the pattern. It is about the intention. It is about the emotionality and the cruelty that is envisaged. And so there is an almost like a universal experience, a universal kind of horror, regardless of where it takes place. And genocides have taken place in every continent, every culture, in every epoch in history. So when you listen to, when our audience and participants listen to the voices, pay attention, because what they're speaking about is the inhumanity that they have witnesses to. But in doing that, they're also representing the bigger inhumanities. And the reason we call genocide a crime against humanity is because exactly for that reason. It doesn't matter where it takes place. It doesn't matter whether it's Tigray or whether it is Darfur or whether it is Rwanda or genocides yet to come. A crime against humanity in one place is a crime against humanity in every place and at all times. That's why a genocidal atrocities, because they're a crime against all humanity everywhere, they become everyone's business. So if there is one kind of core outcome, I hope that will emerge from this session, is for people to understand that this becomes a collective and a shared responsibility, both for perpetrators, for survivors, bystanders, and also, I hope, more and more of you, us, who are wanting to say that enough is enough. So without more further ado, let me introduce Sandra from Rwanda. Sandra, I think, is a member of the Rwandan community. She lives in the UK, but she was born in Rwanda, and she will share her community's experience. And I think rather than me introduce her in greater detail, she's the best person placed to talk about her own experiences. Thank you. Sandra, go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to speak to you again. It's always good to have somebody to speak to. For me, it matters. Right. So I've been listening to Mr. Mukesha Kapila talking about how he visited Rwanda after the genocide. And I felt like, well, you should have stopped in one of my villages and see what happened. But yeah, when you're a visitor is one thing, having a look is one thing, but being in it. So I was 10 years old. I remember we had a little family. You said, how did you describe the little houses in the villages? Yeah, we had two of those. And I remember one of the nights, it was such a dark night, actually. My mom woke me up and everybody get out of the house, let's go. And little did I know she's actually trying to save our lives without our house being on fire. When we're in it, we're inside it. So at a 10-year-old, my mom was scared and everybody was getting out of going nowhere. And she wanted to make us safe to where everywhere was full of fire. You couldn't go anywhere. But obviously, thank goodness we're in a village. We had so many bushes. We managed to hide into them. But that's just part of the biggest scary of the night. But what I saw in these few weeks was very traumatic, that I can no longer trust a human being as this grown as I am. I find it difficult to trust people. I cannot even, it has to be a lot for me to trust you because of what I've seen a human beings capable of doing. For example, I remember moving from my village to the other, and then I saw this man hanging on a tree with one wood coming through here to the other side, hanging like that. And I'm like, who could do that? But there were a group of men standing beside him and they were having a laugh. And they just did that to him. He was screaming and bleeding, and then they were having a laugh. I don't understand it. And also, because remember the war was done because of the different tribes. So remember, one tribe could marry the other. So if you were pregnant and your husband is a Tutsi, obviously the reckless people or the killers, they would terminate the pregnancy. I saw a woman, she was called out of her house. She was one of my neighbor. She was called out of her house and she was beaten badly. She was pregnant and were trying to beat her in the stomach and trying to get the baby out. Because we didn't have fancy fences, you could see through what's happening. But obviously we're trying to hide as well. That I can't understand until the woman started bleeding, and they were like, yeah, that one is dead. So that is, for me, the power people who are packing this information to us is they want to have the power. They want to, like these people in Tigray, it's for them, it's a game. I don't know what kind of satisfaction they get. So all these unbelievable actions of human beings against the other because of power, I don't understand, and I cannot start to believe that how people sleep after doing that. I don't understand. Personally, I was sexually abused, and it was that stage as well, with no mom and dad to tell what happened. Went through all sorts of infection and surgery, and luckily I think I was a born lucky child. I've always got somebody to give me a hand. So all these impacted me with, you have to live with these endless diseases, medication, and all the stuff. These things don't leave you alone. They're scars. You keep looking at them and you remember when it happened and how it happened. It is not fair. We don't want to see this happening to these countries. And it's not only Rwanda, it's going to go to a genocide can be formed anywhere, as long as people are trying to catch for one to get the powers, how you abuse them however they can. Also, the other thing is, and a grown up now, I still find it so hard to understand that I can't love myself. It has affected me that I don't know my identity because I moved from one country to the other. I lived in Rwanda. I left Rwanda after genocide, went to Uganda, and then traveled to Kenya. Then I'm in Scotland. But even then, even now, I'm just under mental health support, stuff like that. If you know what I mean, there's a lot of help here. So it does. I'm lost. I feel like there is a person inside of me that doesn't know where they belong, or where they should be. That is because of this destruction has caused to me. And I have a voice to speak for these people who are going through the same situation down in Tigray, and it's a shame that it's happening to them today and to them, and some people are just watching it happening. I don't want to do that. That's why I wanted to share my experience with them, and hopefully it won't happen again. I'm trying to see if I've gotten something. But having said this, there is a better way of getting things together. We're human beings. We learn and we develop. It's good we're doing this. Let's pick up pieces and build our Lego, as I always say. Don't give up. That's me.
Sandra, thank you very much for sharing your traumatic experiences with us. And I think your frustration comes out loud and clear about how these things are allowed to happen, why are they allowed to happen. And I think the other point, apart from your personal traumas, which obviously part of the experience, is that of the long-term consequences of the individual. There are those who don't survive, and unfortunately millions have been killed during genocides. But then the millions who survive are left with a legacy which haunts them and their families and their communities forever and ever. That's why we very often say that a society that has tasted genocide is forever a genocide or a post-genocide society. It's a kind of a permanent description of the state of affairs. The community is permanently traumatized. They can adapt to it. They can live with it as you live with a virus like COVID, but you can't go backward. That experience is burnt into your psyche as a nation and as a community. Thank you, and I hope we will have some more discussion. Maybe now to turn to talk a bit about Darfur, and we are going to do that by sharing a short slip. I think we were going to have Ismail to join us, but we're going to start with a short clip from Darfur.
Under British control since the late 19th century, Sudan declared independence as a sovereign state in 1956. Independence, however, did not bring stability, but instead resulted in 2 prolonged civil wars. The tensions driving the terrible civil wars were rooted in the economic, political, and social domination of largely non-Muslim, non-Arab southern Sudanese. There was rampant competition for resources, including oil, and because disputes were difficult to settle, the region became increasingly militarized as a result. The desertification of Sudan and resulting famine, combined with raging conflicts, led to mounting regional pressures. In the early 2000s, Arab tribesmen known as the Janjaweed armed themselves and began raiding non-Arab villages in Darfur. The Janjaweed are known for looting villages and then burning them to the ground. They enslave and rape women and children while murdering most males. They also contaminate water sources by disposing of dead bodies in wells. As of today, over 480,000 people have been killed, with over 2.8 million displaced. The government of Sudan has played an integral role in supplying the Janjaweed attacks with air support. In 2009, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Sudanese President Omar Bashir for crimes against human rights. However, Sudan will not relinquish Bashir, which has led to increased violence in the country. The Janjaweed have also forcefully removed relief agencies from the country, preventing citizens from receiving any international aid. The Sudanese government signed a ceasefire agreement in February 2010, and South Sudan was declared a separate nation in 2011. However, the Janjaweed continued to launch raids and airstrikes against villages of Darfur, and the influx of refugees in neighboring countries has created tense political relations within Western Africa.
Thank you very much. Jerusalem, what happens next? We have another video, or that's it?
There's one extra video, sorry.
There's another video, okay.
This is Kalma refugee camp, home to nearly 200,000 Darfuris. After 20 years of conflict, the camp has become a city, and 2 million people across the region have been displaced. We are one of the first international journalists to travel freely here in a decade. The world's attention may have shifted, but the memories of the conflict are still fresh here. Ilyas was 19 when he fled his burning home. In the morning he teaches, and in the afternoon he cuts hair to earn a bit of extra cash.
في نفس الوقت واحد من الجنجويد ده قال انه ده ولد من ابناء بتاعت الابيد كما يسمونه هم ديل الجنجويد بيسموا اهل دارفور بالابيد والثاني قام لزاني كده وبقعت بوشي كده على النار.
The next generation of Darfuris are growing up in these camps. Older children study in temporary classrooms. Their parents are too scared to return to their homes. The government of Sudan wants these people to go back to their areas. It says it's safe enough. There's a peace process ongoing. People here have told me more than once that it's very difficult for them to move back to their homes when there is no security. The conflict in Darfur began in 2003, when ethnic African rebels took up arms against Omar al-Bashir's Arab-dominated government. Bashir responded by arming local militias known as the Janjaweed. They burned villages and killed anyone that got in their way. Local sheikhs say their lands are still occupied by settlers brought in from neighboring countries. For them, putting Bashir on trial is not enough. So Muhammad Yahya here is telling me that although there had been a shift in Khartoum, the people who were overseeing the genocide and the ethnic cleansing are at the helm of power in this country, and that the new prime minister, although he's visited a government-controlled area, he hasn't come to visit people who are affected, like the people here in Kalma. Peacekeepers patrolled the lanes of Kalma, but not for long. In November, the UN withdrew most of its troops from South Darfur, leaving just 200 to patrol an area the size of England. They planned to pull out completely within a year. This UN base was meant to be transformed into a new university campus. As the last of the peacekeepers left, the base was looted whilst government troops watched. The suffering in Darfur was a central rallying cry of the protesters during the 5-month revolution that ousted Bashir last April. But did these words echo as far as Darfur? This attack at the end of last year suggests not. 50 people were killed and 40,000 were displaced when their camp was burned. As long as attacks like these go unpunished, there will be no peace.
Okay. That's it, Jerusalem?
Yeah,
No,
that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So we've had some interesting reminders about Darfur. Some of you may know that I was the head of the United Nations when the Darfur genocide happened on my watch, so to speak. And I remember visiting Kalma camp when it was just a few scores of people before it grew to what became almost a city really in its own right. A couple of points I wanted to make before we moved on. The first one is in the first video, it seemed to give the impression at the beginning of it that somehow the poverty of Darfur, with people competing over scarce natural resources, was somehow a causative factor in the genocide. It is not. Many people have excused the Darfur genocide by saying, oh, well, these are poor people and they're fighting over shortage of water, shortage of land, and so on and so forth. That's total rubbish. And I don't know who made that film, but I would strongly object to what it said at the very beginning of that particular film. The fact is, history tells us that poverty doesn't cause genocide. There is not a single episode of a genocidal act committed by poor people against other poor people. Genocidal acts are committed by those who have enough resources to commit those acts. By and large, poor people do not commit such acts. And of course, people can compete for scarce resources, but then there's no recorded cases that I know of where where the limitations of resources have generated, if you like, genocidal conflicts. Genocides are always the act of state authorities, in this case, the Sudanese authorities, as was mentioned also in the videos. And it's they who manipulated local actors and so on and so forth. It's very, very important that when histories of genocides are written, people do not give fake and false alibis for the perpetration of these crimes against humanity anywhere. The other point I'd kind of like to make is that the legacy of Darfur lies to the present day. What we are seeing in what is going on in Sudan is that because full justice was not done in the case of the 1990, in the case of the 2003 genocide in Darfur, because it's a job half done, the shadow of that is haunting the country now. And many of the people who are in power in Sudan now are actually some of the genocidal leaders from nearly 20 years, more than 10 years ago. So, and that's the point I wanted to make really for everyone to understand, that there is no moving on from genocide unless justice is done. Justice has to be seen to be done, and justice has to be done in reality. If that doesn't happen, then history cannot move on. And you cannot then speak about a society being a post-genocide society. So very often there is a fake debate between people about justice versus peace. Some say, oh, let's have peace first and genocide will come. And if you look at history of genocides or indeed other situations, never is peace sustained if justice is short-circuited. And that, unfortunately, is what is happening in the case of Sudan and Darfur And that, I'm afraid, might happen in the case of Ethiopia. That's why if you want to get over the current chapter in Tigrayan history, then there can be no compromise with justice. You cannot make peace on the back of compromising justice. That's a lesson from many, many circumstances around the world, whether it is Rwanda, whether it's the Nazi Holocaust, or other kinds of genocidal atrocities that people know about. So without more ado, let me turn now to our third speaker from, she's actually, I think, in Denver. She's Milette, and Milette has spent more than 20 years fighting as a social justice and activist, and as a trained journalist. And she runs Denver's Social Justice Cafe. And she was recently, I think, traveled to Sudan to interview Tigrayan refugees, and has met dozens of political representatives in the US to advocate for an end to the war. And most sadly, when I was reading her bio, I was very upset to learn that she has lost 9 family members herself in the Tigray Genocide. So, Milette, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kapila. Can you guys hear me? Can you all hear me okay?
Hear you, at least I can hear you.
Okay, good, good. Thank you for having me. This is such a pleasure. Thank you to the Tigrayan Youth Network for inviting me to be here today. I think you all see what a blessing Mr. Kapila is. I had the pleasure of interviewing him on Tigray Media House a couple of months ago, and he is just a wealth of information and the authority on understanding genocide. So it's been a pleasure to be with you this morning. I want to say a few things. The first thing is, yes, I've lost 9 family members. That was within the first 4 months of the genocide. So I have no idea at this point, obviously, where anyone is or the status of my extended family. Most of my family are farmers, and they're in areas that are hard to reach. So those 9 individuals were people who were closer to the cities. And of those 9, there's one family member who was beheaded by Eritrean soldiers in front of his mother. So that is the extent of what's happening and how closely we are all impacted. And I am not unique. I am one Tigrayan, and this is the story, unfortunately, for so many Tigrayans. I'm really grateful to Sister Sandra, who spoke earlier, and I'm really sorry for your pain, and we all can relate, especially as she spoke of the scars and the reminders of having been sexually assaulted and raped. You know, we know that women in Tigray currently have no services, and I think of them often. No medicine, no care. There are women who were impregnated by soldiers after being raped by multiple soldiers even. What kind of care are they getting? We also know of a young woman in Sudan who drank bleach in order to abort her baby because she couldn't get access to a clinic and an abortion. So the state of the women in Tigray still until today is one that's very, very traumatizing. And so I'm grateful to have heard from Sister Sandra in Rwanda. One thing that, Mr. Kapila, one thing you said when I interviewed you was there is a pathology to genocide. And I never forgot that. And I think about that often. It's recognizable. There are things that are recognizable from genocide to genocide. And it's not difficult to understand if you study it and if you listen to people who know. And so I want to talk about what's happening in Tigray a little bit differently today. I want to go through the stages of genocide and talk about what's happened in Tigray that relates to those. So I'll just mention a few things under each stage. And by the way, I just returned from DC where we had the 1-year protest, marking the 1 year since the genocide began. And there was an incredible exhibit put on by 24 Hours for Tigray and Tigray Action Committee that did just that. And it was the start of something really powerful that I think we need to continue. So the first stage is classification. And I want to read to you a few ways that we've been impacted in Tigray. The CEO of ESAT, a very, very, just very hateful satellite news TV station, Andergachot Ege said, Back then, only Mengistu knew Tegaru are TPLF. But now we know all Tegaru, people from farmer to beggar to educated, are TPLF. So this is when they start othering Tigrayans. Then more talk comes from this same station where they say it's the 95% versus the 5%. And you hear that majority minority narrative starts and catches on really quickly in the country. It starts to become a war of Ethiopia versus the traders being Tigrayans. People become afraid to speak Tigrinya in the capital city. They don't wear traditional braids. They very much try to blend in and look like a good Ethiopian. A good Ethiopian does not look like a Tigrayan. The next step is symbolization. This is pretty powerful because now you start seeing a lot more anti-Tigrayan hate speech, including from the prime minister himself. You start hearing them refer to Tigrayans as locusts and lice and beggars and bandas and juntas and weeds, a cancerous weed that needs to be uprooted, says the prime minister. He also refers to Tigrayans as daytime hyenas. And so you start seeing a lot more of that symbolization. The third stage, discrimination. Basically denying Tigrayans their rights. All of the services are cut off in Tigray, from phones to internet to water to, I mean, imagine we're in the middle of a pandemic and there is literally no running water. It's a shame. Then you have the government that starts asking for lists of Tigrayan workers in Tigray. So much has happened over the last year. We were drinking from a fire hose. And so we almost forget or gloss over things or don't have time to process things that happened before we move on to the next atrocity. But there was a point, and actually still, where the government was asking for names, going to people in government jobs, people who worked for the airlines, banks, NGOs, even the African Union. They were asking for the names of ethnic Tigrayans who worked there. Recently, landlords were given a week to provide the names of all of their Tigrayan tenants. So it hasn't stopped. Don't forget, there was also the federal forces were purged of ethnic Tigrayans who worked for them. There was even a shootout in Somalia when they tried to disarm the peacekeepers, Tigrayan peacekeepers. This is a quote from Brigadier General Tesfaye Ayelu. He says, "We have to clean our insides, even if there are no good people among them. We can't differentiate the good from the bad." Tigray is, you mentioned earlier, denied PPE equipment. They're denied anything to combat the locust issues. And then I'm going to jump to dehumanization. And this has probably been one of the most painful ones for Tigrayans to sort of swallow. If you remember, there was a big billboard that was put up in Bahir Dar of wanted TPLF officials, and they called them terrorists. You had people go on Walta television. This is a General Kasai Chameda, who says, "They are an infection. What can you do with an infected person?" There was also a Protestant church service that airs live on TV, where the pastor performs an exorcism on a woman who they say is possessed as a Tigrayan spirit, killing ENDF soldiers in Tigray. And so you can see how dehumanizing that is. It goes on and on to the point where you have the Facebook whistleblower even who specifically mentions that their platform helped fan ethnic flames and violence in the country. On social media, you had people posting things like TPLF is a cannibal tribal association. Tigrayans got wealthy out of nowhere. They draw images. There were images of the devil draped in the Tigrayan flag, not the TPLF political flag, which is there is an actual flag for the political party, the actual Tigrayan flag. So you can see how they say it's a war on TPLF, on a political party, but everything references the people. You had an actual medical doctor in the United States in Virginia named Solomon Bogale, who says he was advocating for concentration camps for Tigrayan children, he says, because we have to protect them. In order to protect Tigrayan children, they need to be put into concentration camps. Very dehumanizing experience over the last year. And then you had the organization of armies and militias. And this one, you had the formation of groups like Fano and Saluk that went into my cadre and literally committed massacres. And they're presented as legitimate military groups or, supporters of the Ethiopian government. You had the president from the Amhara region, Aganyu Hutashakar, say, I call on all young people, militia and non-militia, armed with government weapons or armed with personal weapons, to join the anti-TPLF mission. You recently have a Gestapo-like force that formed in Addis Ababa, where more than 27,000 youth or individuals in Addis Ababa have been recruited, primarily youth, to go through Tigrayan neighborhoods to harass ethnic Tigrayans. And if they suspect them, these are just everyday people, they get to play police. If they suspect this Tigrayan of being an affiliate of TPLF, they get to turn them over to police. And as you know, there are concentration camps set up in Addis Ababa and around Addis Ababa. I personally know of people who have been arrested and who are being held there. And there are lots of family members who I don't dare call because I don't want them to speak to me in Tigrinya or to create some type of situation. And then there was also, in terms of organizing, you had the Facebook post where Abiy, which was taken down actually, where Abiy Ahmed says, bury the Tigrayans who are coming. It's the obligation to die for Ethiopia belongs to all of us. So the next stage is polarization. And here you have lots of broadcasts and propaganda. You have Eskinder Nega, a so-called journalist who currently now is back in jail, ironically, who said, we must emulate Nazi Germany's extermination of the Jews to remove the cancerous Jews of Ethiopia, referring to Tigrayans. You had Messiah Makonnen, also from ESAT television, who says, to kill a rotten fish, the ocean must be drained. And he continues the 95% versus 5% narrative. You have preparation. You hear things like, if we don't kill them first, they will kill us. Or they're coming back to rule Addis Ababa, this type of fear narrative of they're coming for you, so we have to stop them. You have images and video of even, there was a young girl who was interviewed by Channel 4 News. She was 15 years old with machetes, and these people are going to go and supposedly go to war for their Ethiopia. And then as far as persecution, which is the 8th stage, you have, of course, the concentration camps that are set up all throughout the country. By the way, the first concentration camp was in my cadre, and it was in a warehouse that was owned by Abadi. Abadi is according to the people, because like Mr. Kapila said, I traveled to Sudan and spoke with refugees. Abadi was a well-known, very wealthy farmer. My cadre is a farming area, a very rich farming area. He has a huge warehouse that became a holding jail for ethnic Tigrayans. More than 7,000 ethnic Tigrayans were being held there. This is, in January when I went to Sudan and spoke with refugees. So that was the first concentration camp, and now they're all over the country. We have more than 250 reported massacres, including the Mahabara Dego, where ethnic Tigrayans were shot and thrown off of cliffs, including an elderly man who had a gabi on his shoulders, which was really painful to watch. You have the Aksum massacre, the infamous Aksum massacre, where hundreds, if not thousands, of people were killed, mostly by Eritrean soldiers. You have Western Tigray that's been completely ethnically cleansed, and people were being told things like, you don't belong on this side of the Tekeze River. We have 2 million internally displaced Tigrayans, and you have Tigrayans being arrested for no other reason than just being Tigrayans. They said it was a war on TPLF, but people like Dorias Gedom were being arrested. He is actually a part of the Asimba party that competed with TPLF in the most recent elections in Tigray. So to extermination, Mr. Kapila described this perfectly when he said, this war is being played out on the bodies of women and girls in Tigray. Every genocide has a signature, and this one is sexual violence. I have never forgotten those words. The sexual violence that is happening on women, when soldiers say things like, we are cleansing your bloodline, or they insert hot metal rods into women's vaginas in order to destroy their reproductive organs. That's genocide. That is genocidal rape. You have people who are intentionally infecting women with HIV. Another thing under extermination that I want to mention is the starvation issue. You had soldiers coming in and they were chopping down orchards, burning down farmlands. That is to create long-term pain. That is to create food insecurity. That is so that people can starve to death. And of course, there's the actual blockade where food and aid is not getting into the borders. And then the last step is denial. And even though we're still in the middle of this genocide, the denial has already started. You have Bilen Siyum, who's a spokesperson for the prime minister, who says there's no genocide. She was just on CNN recently saying everything, this is all fake news. The prime minister himself has denied rape and said that there were a few soldiers, I think 7 soldiers have been persecuted for rape in Ethiopia. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of a different way of thinking about this and putting it together. The exhibit that was done in DC is so powerful, and I hope that we can replicate that, because it's one thing to hear about this in pieces, but when you see it all laid out in photos and screenshots, it's an entirely different picture. And this is a genocide. We have to call it a genocide. I think about Rwanda and how the Clinton administration was hesitant to call it a genocide because they might be forced to act. And that's where we are now. Never again is right now, and it is a genocide. Thank you for your time.
Milek, thank you very much. That was a tour de force. I think when I kind of got involved in this business of Tigray, I was also reluctant to call it a genocide. And it took me some time to join the dots. And then I moved towards calling it, the things that were going on, genocidal atrocities. There's a distinction between a genocidal atrocity and a genocide. And that phase lasted 3 or 4 months. But thanks to journalists like you and other fearless, I should say, not fearsome, fearless journalists who have unearthed what was going on. There's enough evidence now to call not just that there are genocidal atrocities taking place here and there, but that the whole of Tigray is a crime scene of genocide. So what's happened, thanks to the testimonies and the evidence that has been gathered, is that now we can speak about the Tigray genocide on a much more solid foundation. When it comes to courts, there are 2 kinds of courts. One is, of course, the courts like the International Criminal Court. The problem is accessing those courts. And someone has to refer, and they have to agree, and the legal procedures are too complicated for most people. And then there is the court of public opinion. And when history is said and done, and it may well be long after we are gone, certainly long after an older person like me is gone, if you like to see, that court of public opinion probably is the most important of all courts in the grand order of things in the world. So those of you who are frustrated, those of you who are facing denial, which is probably the worst of all things, especially obviously authorities and so on, should remember that the most important court is a court of public opinion, global court of public opinion. And there is where the victory has to be finally won. So let me now hand over to our next moderator, who is Rowena Kahe, and over to you, Rowena.
Thank you, Professor Mukesh. Thank you, Melita, for your contribution and for speaking about the campaign of violence and dehumanization that has targeted Tigrayans and that has been rampant this past year. We've seen how dehumanizing language and as a result, mass destruction has been normalized. You also spoke about the systematic use of sexual violence and how it's been a tool of oppression and subjugation. Our next panelist has done extensive work on speaking about the violence targeting women in Tigray. His name is Gabriel Maskal Gabriel Mariam, and he's a Tigrayan and a passionate human rights activist. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Rowena, and everyone, every member of the Tigray Youth Network and the UK Tigray Mahata, and of course every panelist here, including the prominent Professor Mukesh Kapila. Thank you so much. So, as a person who has been extensively engaged in following the stories of the Tigrayan mothers and sisters, I'm going to just give the tip of the iceberg as long as the agony of the Tigray war victims is concerned. First, let me make sure that I want to explain that why I would like to say victims, not survivors. Many people have challenged me and asked me why I stick to using victims rather than saying survivors. And of course, at the beginning, when I started this journey, I was strongly convinced of saying survivors. But later on, I was confronted by other Tigrayans that how can we say they have survived, yet they have not got at least the simplest medical help that they deserve to get. And of course, I was very much convinced. And when I later on started calling victims during the short windows of the telecom service in early March, April, and May, till it was completely switched off in June, that was the reality on the ground, that the women, the very women who were gang raped, they told me that almost 98% of them, they didn't get medical help, and no help at all, because obviously the medical facilities were completely destroyed by the joined Eritrean, Ethiopian soldiers in the Amhara Fano. So when I say victims, don't be disappointed, or just to make things clear why, at least to have the perspective why I chose to say victims, so that we learn or we know how dire situation they are in. They have not survived yet. That's my conviction. But we can argue, but for the time being, because of the justification I provided, I use victims. Saying that, I will focus on the stories and challenges, and finally I will have some short plea. Age range of the victims I have been able to directly contact, or I have been able to hear directly from victims who saw them, victims telling the stories of other victims who were gang raped with them. So first-hand account. So the youngest one is 9 years old, and the oldest one is 72 years old. I am mentioning direct testimony from them. Of course, on the media, we have heard about 89 years old woman and 4 years old baby or girl among those who were raped. But in my direct call with victims, the youngest 9 years old and the oldest 72 years old. And background of the victims, there are students, elementary school students, high school students, college students, as well as university students. Marriage status, teens, of course, unmarried, married, mothers, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, including virgins and nuns. Health status, women or girls with chronic disease, including cancer, autism. Girls with autism, these are some of the health status of those victims who were gang raped. And place of the rape, while those victims were fleeing to a safe haven, distancing themselves as much as they could from the active battlefields. When they were fleeing to Sudan or to other cities, big cities in Tigray, while they were in their hideouts in the village, while they were hiding, escaping in the village, in the forests, in the caves, while they were fetching water in the villages, while they were shepherding livestock in the fields, in the villages, while they were at homes, mothers and daughters, and of course, nuns, while they were praying at church, and of course, Catholic nuns, while they were taking care of orphaned kids at orphanage centers. And of course, women, they were taken to church compounds and gang raped at church compounds. Cases and types of the rape. Out of those, I was privileged to directly talk with, or I heard from victims about the story of other victims. 99% of them are victims of gang rape. Only one teenager was raped by a single soldier. The rest, all of them gang rape. So let me take you to the first testimony. It was in the month of December 2020. A man at Tigray, of course, in his 70s, his wife and his daughter in her early 20s were fleeing the town of Dansha in western Tigray to Shira through the David town. They took shelter after arriving at the town of David for a few days. Unfortunately, the Eritrean soldiers started shelling the town of David from the direction of Shiraro. Then these people, the father, his wife, and the daughter in her early 20s, 23 to be exact, they fled to the villages of David. After 3 days of the shelling, the mother and her daughter went back to the town to collect stuff necessary for the baby because the daughter had a baby. They were confronted by 3 Eritrean soldiers after arriving at the town. The Eritrean soldiers asked them, "Where have you been? We have been at the village, hiding, escaping from the shelling. Why would you hide? Why would you flee to the village? Are we beasts?" Then the mother and the daughter replied, "You are not beasts. We had to flee to save ourselves from the shelling." So the Eritrean soldiers started torturing the daughter and the mother, of course. Then finally they took the baby from the back of the daughter, handed the baby over to the elderly mother. They gang raped her daughter in front of the mother carrying the baby, grandchild standing next to her, her daughter being gang raped by 3 Eritrean soldiers. They dumped the mother and the raped daughter there. They left the area, and finally the mother, crying, she washed her daughter and took her to the village where her father in his late 70s was staying. The daughter begged her mother not to tell her dad about what she went through. The mother promised not to share her story to anyone, including the father. They stayed in the village for 3 months. 3 months of no medical help, no first aid, nothing at all in the village. After 3 months, they went to Shira town, where the largest IDP center is located. In Shira, it took us, I was involved, it took us many days to convince this victim to visit a doctor. We had to convince her every day, to beg her. Finally, she said, okay. Then we managed to take her to a health center where she was examined. So, because there are lots of stories, let me cut this short here and let me go to the next story. Case 2, testimony 2. When the Tigrayans were being massacred, ethnically cleansed, gang rape at Maikadra, this mother of 3 children fled with other Tigrayans by paying money to a Sino truck driver. When the Sino truck arrived at the banks of the Tekaza River, the driver ordered everyone to get off. Having heard the Amhara Fano were already massacring the Tigrayans on the river banks of the Tekaza River, everyone started running from the scene. This poor and helpless mother of 3 and other 2 Tigrayan women were left behind. 4 young Tigrayans, they looked behind and observed 3 helpless women left behind. They decided to risk their lives in order to help the 3 helpless women. Those 3 young Tigrayans returned back. And when they started helping those women, dozens of Eritrean soldiers came from nowhere and surrounded them on the river banks. They separated the 4 young Tigrayan men. They shot them dead in front of the 3 Tigrayan women. Then they started torturing, beating, slapping, insulting, ethnic slurs, everything, the 3 helpless women. Finally, they divided them among themselves. This mother of 3 was gang raped by 5 Eritrean soldiers, the other likewise, the others. It was 17 hours of gang rape. It started 5 p.m. December 28th, and it ended at 10 a.m. December 29th. 17-hour duration, you can calculate. 17 hours of non-stop gang rape. This mother of 3 had a baby, the baby, 2 months old baby, a baby which needs breastfeed, a baby which needs care. Unfortunately, they dumped the baby on the ground. Those 5 soldiers took turns to gang rape her. They couldn't have sympathy for the baby while she was begging to at least breastfeed her baby because the baby was crying frequently. At 10 a.m., they hit a metallic rod. They inserted the hot metallic rod So, okay, yeah, I think there is a message. I have to end the presentation here. I am, yeah, it's, okay, let me mention one final, and I will not go to the details. I was on the phone a couple of hours ago. This woman is gang raped by 8 soldiers, and now she is languishing to death in Sudan. So to finalize my presentation, I just want to plead with everyone to pay attention to the tens of thousands of victims of this weaponized rape. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gavramascal Gavramariam, for sharing such heartbreaking testimonies of Tigrayan women and girls. I think we know that the gendered dimension of war means by design, women and girls face the brunt of violence, and the nature of the violence inflicted upon Tigrayan women and girls has been so sinister and systemic that the genocidal undercurrents are clear. It's shown as intended to strip future generations of their Tigrayan heritage, and it's demonstrative of the commitment to terrorizing the Tigrayan people, and that's seen through the brutality inflicted upon women and girls. So thank you for sharing that. Up next, we have a video from Dr. Itana Dinka. He is a political analyst and an assistant professor of history at James Madison University, where he teaches African history and survey courses. His research and interests emphasize the political and environmental histories of Ethiopia and the Horn and Oromo Ethiopia historiographies. Dr. Itana is the author of Society, Revolution and Military Intervention in Ethiopian Politics, Experiences among the Maka Oromo of Walaga during the Darg regime. So we'll play a short video.
Oromo people in what is today Ethiopia starts with the foundation of the empire. Ethiopia was born as an empire. It has been an empire, and still it's an empire, basically. And one key problem of Ethiopia is the political idea that an empire can be transformed into a nation with coherent national identity. Ethiopia attempted this thing to happen several times over the last century, particularly in the 20th century. The empire tried to remake itself into a nation, a coherent nation which speaks the same language, practices the same religion, which is Orthodox Christianity, definitely, and Orthodox Christianity, which can be expressed only in Amharic and Ge'ez. So the plight of the Oromo people and other nations starts from this fundamental struggle, contradiction within the Ethiopian state. So when Ethiopia was established as an empire, it conquered peoples and the states in what is today the South. So many people around the world, including on the continent of Africa today, express Ethiopia as the only uncolonized country, but that is only half of the story. Ethiopia was a colonizer as well as uncolonized state. It defeated Italians in the north, but practiced colonialism in the south. So the resources throughout Oromia were robbed, as it happened in Benishangul Gumuz, as it happened in many parts of the south, including in Sidama, Walaita, Kambata, and many nations. So historically, since that empire believed it could convert itself into a country which speaks same language or a nation with coherent national identity, it definitely precisely subjugated and oppressed its own nations. Ethiopia is a country of nations. That is what led to oppression, ethno-national oppression in Ethiopia, and that is what informs the birth of liberation fronts in Ethiopia that lasted until this very day. So this question remained unaddressed through the 1974 revolution and 1991 revolution. I don't mean nothing happened because of 1974 revolution and 1991 revolution. Lots of transformations happened that changed and reconfigured Ethiopian state, but some of its key features remained, particularly the combination of politics and military, or achieving political objectives through military means. The necessity of violence in Ethiopia is paramount importance. So that behavior remained. The idea of oppressing nations and nationalities who believe in their own autonomy, who believe in their own historical consciousness, remained even through the EPRDF era, the time when the state told itself and the world that it is a country of nations, nationalities, and peoples. So arresting peoples, killing, extrajudicial killings, and lots of things that happened to peoples, including to the Oromo nation, drives from this fundamental problem. And right now, as the 2018 transition was triggered in 2018, it was primarily Oromia and region and the Oromo people which were exposed to serious violations, particularly in western and eastern parts of Guji, 4 administrative zones of Olega, and later even western and northern parts of Shah, and eastern and western parts of Erge, and it came to engulf the entire Oromia region. So the war in Tigray, in some way, started in Oromia because the objective of the regime in power right now is to reverse whatever little achievements were made, whatever little progresses were made over the last 3 decades in relation to the right to self-determination for the nations that have been historically oppressed and subjected. So once the regime in Addis Ababa believed that it successfully attacked and defeated the Oromo nation by practicing extrajudicial killings, hundreds of thousands of arrests, and lots of multiple forms of violence, it then turned its face to conventional war in Tigray. So what happened in Tigray was the most extreme form of violence, but it began in Oromia, in its elementary form. It began in Oromia. So in terms of the political objectives and national aspirations, the intentions of the Tigray nation and the Oromo nation is very much comparable, and the form of violence they have been exposed to is also similar, although the level is very high. At this moment, the regime in power is not in control of any part of the country. It's not in control of any, any part of the country. Many parts of Oromia are under control of the rebel Oromo Liberation Army, and so is many parts of the southern nation. Tigray is under full control of TDF and the government of Tigray. The Amara region is turned into a disturbed house. And one important thing that people usually pays little attention to is the rhetoric we have in the politics today in Ethiopia. are very much similar to the pre-genocide rhetoric in Rwanda. Well, I won't get into deeper into the idea of genocide, particularly in relation to Rwanda, because it's a separate topic. But it's important to reflect on the comparison between where Ethiopia is located today as a country and what happened in Rwanda before the 1994 genocide. Many media outlets in 1994 presented the conflict in Rwanda and the resultant genocide as a result of hate or hate speech, but that is very shallow and a reflection of misunderstanding. The hate was real, but the hate we saw in Rwanda was historical. It was deeply embedded in history. Now, history where we have certain ethnic groups benefited from the structures of the state, and other ethnic groups suffered from the way the state wanted to operate itself or operate its daily works. So it was deeply embedded in history, very much similar to what is in Ethiopia today. What we have in Ethiopia today did not start in 2020, as many people think. It started with the birth of the empire that looked down on its own nations, the empire that committed itself to erase from the face of the earth the identity of many nationalities, the language, the cultures, the religions, whatever they have. They fought back. And that resulted in two revolutions, 1974 and 1991. Now, the empire tried to come back, and the nations are fighting back again. So the conflicts in Ethiopia are packaged in historical contradictions and hate, which are historical in forms. So people need to be aware that there is a dangerous moment in Ethiopia today, like the pre-genocide days in Rwanda. Because genocide, wherever it happened in history, was committed by organized entity, particularly by the state. Now, the Amara regional state has become clearly, in all its manifestations, it became a fascist government. So is the government of Abiy, the government at the federal level, and even state structures in Oromia are committed to kill people in mass. We have seen this over the last 3 years. It's really a dangerous moment. People are worried about transitions, about regime change, but if not enough care is taken, Ethiopia may face even more.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Itana for his short clip that covered the contradictions within the Ethiopian state and its genesis as an empire that inevitably gave birth to a number of liberation fronts that fought for self-governance, which we still see today throughout the country. He spoke about the necessity of violence that exists in Ethiopia, and we were able to see the physical manifestation of that with the genocidal war on Tigray. Next, we have a clip from the Women's Association of Srebrenica with subtitles read from Velag Johannes from TYN.
Ja sam Ramiza Burdić, asocijacija majki. Moj muž Yunus je imao 40 kada je ubijen.
My husband Yunus was 42 years old when he was killed. My son Mustafa was 20 years old. He was 18 when they were killed. They are just 3 of over 8,000 men and boys who were brutally killed in 1995. 24 years have passed since their deaths. Mustafa was buried in 2005 and Junius in 2009, and Mehdurin in 2010. But the memories of that which took place, the screams, the gunshots, and what I find most difficult, the fearful eyes of my son, Mustafa, which will haunt me for the rest of my life. By the side of the road, under the watch of armed guards, was a scared group of captured men and boys who were part of the column which tried to escape by going into the woods. As the bus passed by those captured, the soldiers who belonged to the Bosnian Serb army said to us women, "Look at your sons and husbands. This is the last time you will see them." I looked and I saw my Mustafa. Our eyes connected for a short time. And then he lowered his head. And that was the last time I saw him alive. To this day, I still do not know what happened to Mehter. My husband was seen in a group of 1,000 men and boys who were captured. They were taken to a warehouse and murdered. They were all good people with good hearts. Not a single day goes by that I don't think of them. At night, I go to sleep with pain in my heart and awake with sorrow. Today, I stand before you. I could spend days talking about the horrors I witnessed. I saw how they killed pregnant women. I saw how Serbian soldiers slaughtered a boy who was only 10 years old. The horrors I witnessed haven't stopped. They have continued even to this day. The Association of Mothers of advocate every day for justice and have done for over 2 decades. We have never sought revenge or spread hatred. We just seek truth and justice. 24 years after I lost my dearest loved ones, the perpetrators of these crimes walk free and spend time with their families. Where is the justice in that? We live with people that know our children are buried, but they refuse to tell us where they are. Our politicians aren't ashamed of openly denying the genocide happened. We will never stop fighting for the truth and justice. As we women age, we feel the weight of responsibility that our stories and the stories of our loved ones are heard and that they are remembered, and that others continue to fight for justice. Everyone present today, I ask you to help us in this fight, the fight against hatred and intolerance, because we truly know what hatred is and what hatred can cause when left to grow. Thank you for listening to our stories and remembering our loved ones.
Thank you. So now we are onto a section where we will hear from others and answer some questions. So I'm giving over to Professor Mukesh.
Thank you. I think I was deeply moved by all the speakers. Moved because they were reflecting their personal realities and their personal experiences and their personal observations. And in the end, that's the most important message of this seminar, that when it's all said and done, when all the strict strategies are done, all the PR is done, it is that personal experience that really matters. What we gathered from the different presentations covering Tigray and Srebrenica and Darfur and Rwanda is that the common pathology is of hatred infects the commissioning of what becomes a genocide. Also, I'm not sure that when these incidents started, they started off as deliberately wanting to commit a genocide. But what I've learned from my experiences of these very places is that genocidal outlooks take on a logic of their own. That what happens is that whether it was in Rwanda or whether it was in Darfur, events take on their momentum. And then the events overtake the actors. And the logic of the activities moves towards its inevitable conclusion, that of genocide. That's why you can't have half a genocide. You can't have a kind of attempted genocide. You can't have any of those things, because the annihilatory act is absolute. It's intended to be permanent. And it is a complete elimination of a people on ground of their identity. And the thing that struck me is the different witnesses were how they, without using those words, they were testifying to those particular, the momentum that was leading to inevitable consequence. It's one of the reasons why, unfortunately, no genocide in history have ever been prevented either. Because by the time you define the genocide, and by the time the forensic pathologists and the historians and everyone gets agrees on it, or the law courts make a ruling, and law courts will only make a ruling based on evidence. And if there is that evidence, it means the act has already happened. So genocide is very often a posthumous historical decision. And that's no consolation to anyone who's caught up in it, has survived it, and is trying to find justice for it. It doesn't mean to say that the pursuit of justice is not important. It is extremely important. It is vital, in fact, for post-genocide societies. But the problem with the state, with what we have here at the moment in Tigray, is that by the time the world listens, and by the time any court decides to rule on it, or by the time the court of public opinion says, yep, it is genocide, it is too late for a great many people. The consolation, of course, of that is that no genocide in history has ever succeeded. That actually, nowhere in history has any people actually been wiped out. Even the Nazis failed in doing that, in a way. But again, that's no consolation to the victims and the survivors, if you like to see. So I guess what I'm saying in reflecting on the different presentations is the realism with which we must approach this and try and deal with what is the present and try and find smart ways of ensuring that this genocide will also fail, regardless of whether or not a court decides it's a genocide, or regardless of the US Congress saying it's a genocide or not a genocide. All that is important, but that should not be the driving motivation of good people around the world trying to do something in terms of trying to stop this from continuing what is happening. So I know that next session, I think the next week we'll be covering more on what to do in relation to recognition for genocide. So I won't say more here, but let me say that I found the evidence being presented in this session to be very compelling in the direction of indicating that the situation in Tigray is unequivocally a genocide by determination of at least the court of public opinion. Over to you, my fellow co-moderator, to do the rest of the session.
Thank you. So now we have some commentary from lead discussants. We have Mrs. Alison Pyle on this topic, and she'll present on presentations covered in the seminar. So I'll hand over to you, Mrs. Alison Pyle.
Oh, hi, thank you very much. I am truly humbled by the testimony today here, and I offer my sincere best wishes to Sandra for the agony she shared with us, and to Millet for the personal losses that she has suffered. And thank you very much for sharing those stories. I think gosh, there's been an awful lot that's been covered today, and just reflecting on all of it, it is, as Dr. Capillo has said, it is about power, and the power of hate that can be used as such a fierce weapon, and the lasting effects that hate can have as well. I guess I just want to make a short comment on the type of power that we're looking at. We're looking at, as Sandra talked about, the power of individuals over those who are tortured and dying in front of them as they laugh. That was very emotive, and a very emotive description. Also, the long-standing power that Dr. Etena spoke about around the desire to eliminate language, identity, religion, to reverse the federalism and self-determination that had so successfully worked in the former state of Ethiopia. So it's with the intention of building a single nation, and where do we go? It's almost as though this desire for power and control is leading, as the final witness from Srebrenica, Ramiza, noted, the hate, the outcome of hate can lead to a place where neighbors have lost trust, and there's no forgiveness, and there's no humanity left in a society. And that testimony from the last speaker from Srebrenica is a painful vision of a future that we hope Tigray will never have to witness. I also was very moved by Millet's description of the pathology of genocide, with the importance of language and how language is used to otherize Tigrayans, and the role that language has as a weapon of the state to turn citizens against one another. And my fear is that this hatred that has seeded itself even in the capital Addis, where Tigrayans are now fearing for their safety. They've lost, for many, they've lost their liberty. Some have lost their livelihoods. This is a very dire situation. I I was very moved by Gebre Meskel's his witness's testimony of the personal agony of victims. And I know my husband and I translated some of the testimony of people in Tigray who were interviewed by National Geographic, and it was haunting. It was, as a listener, it was traumatizing. The loss of self, the shame, the trauma, and that, as we hear again from Sandra, will never go away and will always be part of the lives of those who are trying to create a new future. So I suppose one question for anyone out there is, how do we interrupt this spiral of hate, this sheer desire for power, and empower the survivors to take hold of their lives and to build a future where there is meaning, because they have so much that they can teach us. I know from my work with young people over many years who have been through war and trauma that resilience is something that a community sort of builds up in individuals, and that resilience is the only thing that can help them to go on. That life will never be the same, but through resilience there can be a sense of a future. And I guess my question for anyone out there is, how do we continue knowing everything that we've learned today? How do we move forward to end the spiral of hate with all the anger and anguish that is held by this community? That's just my thoughts initially. There was so much covered, it's so hard to capture it in any other way. But I guess, yes, Dr. Mukesh Kapila, you made a very powerful point that it is not about poverty, it is the state that's an actor, and it is about maybe through it's about how do we stop the state? How do we create a state where there is
I'm so sorry, Alison, we have 2 minutes left, so sorry.
That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for all the participants. It was really interesting.
Thank you, Alison. I'd like to invite any questions or comments from Ms. Wintanet Agai, Ms. Hanna Taddasa, and Dr. Adisalam Belai. Fairly short, if you can. Thank you.
Sorry, do we go in that order?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all for organizing such an incredible and necessary, even though it's hard to listen to and painful to hear. It's very necessary. So thank you all for organizing it. I just would like to quickly, before I ask my question, just say thank you to Melita for shouting out 24 Hours for Tigray, who I'm a very proud member of. We're a very small team, global, and we worked hard day and night across time zones to put that exhibition together. So thank you, Melita. I know you've been supporting us, and we look forward to taking that exhibition global. And I think it's so important that we tell our story to the world and tell everyone what is happening in Tigray. So thank you so much for that, Melita. The other question I have was really about rehabilitation. I just want to kind of look beyond this moment, even though it's very hard to do, and focus a little on the work that awaits us on the other side of this genocide. So the question is perhaps for Sandra, who might be able to give us some advice or ideas about what we as the Tigray community moving forward can do in terms of helping our people in Tigray rehabilitate and recover and, come out of this horrific experience they've had. What would you kind of, I don't know, from your experience, what are some of the practical, tangible, comprehensive post-abuse and trauma rehabilitation methods that perhaps worked in Rwanda that we can kind of take on and start thinking about, taking back home or putting together? Sandra, if you're there, it'd be great to hear from you as a survivor yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Like I said in my message, it's quite a long journey. As we all understand, it's not like a snap of a finger that you click that memory and then it turns around. No, it is hard, difficult, but the first thing I really was screaming out is safety, sense of security, and a little quietness in my head of these men threatening me, others harassing me with their vulgar language and sexual abusive words in my mind, and screaming all this. I wanted it to go away for a second or two, or just somewhere to lie and I know that nobody's gonna threaten me, come and dragging my mom and dad away to go and kill them. All that those are the fundamental things I think we could have a look at, finding that how can we ensure the safety, that these people are actually protected. Yes, they don't have everyday protection, or how do we call them in today's world? A person who protects you, the word is gone, a bouncer. No, we're looking about a general picture of people feeling safe in their own environment, in the little they have, and protected by those who are in power. I mean, to be honest, they should be the one tackling all this. So we're trying to help with their mistakes and amend it, but what we need is just protection and a little bit of knowing that you've got a home, security, identity. Somebody else mentioned it. Those are the things I wanted. But then all the rest of the journey was to find, obviously, you understand we're gonna need to form groups of where people who have survived, especially young people, because young people, young early age, were deprived a lot. Primary socialization and how the society works and blah, blah, that goes. But to gain all these things, it's a person who's going to sit you back in a very safe place and tell you, this is how our values are. And tackle on every person as aspects of life in a human development. It's going to take a lot. And also you understand the community, re-educating societies not to hate each other, not to be, I can't believe the neighbor that my mom used to go borrow salt from, the husband is the one who came and dragged my dad and killed him. For me, I don't understand that confusion between society. We need to re-educate. It's a lot of work. I can't answer very much, but I think you kind of get a picture of what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Sandra. Next, I invite Dr. Addisalam Belai. If you have any questions or comments to any of the panelists.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Everybody? Okay, thank you so much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the moderators and presenters, Professor Kapila, Melite, Sandra, Mascal, Rowena, yourself, Jerusalem, and Alison. Thank you so much for putting all this together, and really it was heartbreaking to listen, but it was very important at the same time. The question I have for you is, whoever wants to answer it for me, as you had recently, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has been concluded the report in collaboration with the United Nations Human Rights Office, and they came with the conclusion that almost nothing has been done after 250 reported cases mentioned earlier on. These are just the tips of the iceberg in comparison to the reality, because when the real investigation takes place, it will be a lot more than we are listening for today. But the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is the right-hand man of Abiy Ahmed, but the United Nations Human Rights Office have decided to go ahead with the right-hand man of Abiy Ahmed, kind of allowing the criminal to investigate his own crime. So from their report, I heard, and they said they have concluded the report from the 3rd of November 2020 until the 28th of June 2021. According to their report, it is it has been already done, so no one can touch it. They are allowing someone to investigate from 28th of June onwards until today. So is this decision, how do we overturn this decision? Because most of the crimes have been committed between the 3rd of November and 28th of June before our government returned back to its office. So this decision on itself is agony and disrespect to our people. So how do we overturn this decision? And also, in order for the International Criminal Court and then the Court of Public Opinion to consider this, what do we need to do as a media? Because I am from Astronomers Media, and as a media, what do we need to do? What can we do to make sure these criminals are facing justice? Thank you so much.
If you're expecting an answer, I'm not sure the answer is very simple, but just to say, everyone agrees that this inquiry was very flawed. So the other point is that this is a human rights inquiry. Appointed by the human rights body of the UN. By itself, it has no authority. Only an inquiry mandated by the UN Security Council has relevant legal force and an executive outcome. And that's what happened in the case of Darfur. So this flawed inquiry jointly between UN Human Rights Office and the government of Ethiopia, which is one of the actors in this whole business, has caused disturbance around the world. It has created its own fake narratives and so on and so forth. But by itself, it is fairly meaningless in terms of actually taking us anywhere at all. A future inquiry will have to be only in circumstances where access is possible. Because even if you were to launch an independent inquiry now, an independent inquiry that is not mandated by the Security Council is fairly pointless, because it will have no legal authority to refer to anyone like the International Criminal Court. And as long as this government in Addis is in power, obviously it's not going to let anyone come in and inquire into anything at all, in a way. So it's great to speak about independent inquiries and so on and so forth, but I can't see how that is going to happen in the foreseeable future unless we have a change of regime in Addis Ababa. So getting the government in Ethiopia changed is the most important way in which you can stop the current genocide in Tigray from getting worse, and then ensuring that a credible process takes place whereby accountability and justice is seen to happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it's Hanna Tattasa next, if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for everybody's expertise, the testimonies, and the unrelenting work that all of you are doing. The burden of advocating and having to organize, mobilize, as we all go through some of the most unimaginable trauma cannot be lost on us. So we do appreciate the incredible responsibility that you are all bearing today. So I am actually from Addis, and I grew up very much believing in the oneness of Ethiopia, where we were taught that really our main enemy is poverty. And so I can feel that we were blinded. In some ways, we were blind towards the many communities who are being disadvantaged. And in today's world, in today's moment, where this unimaginable reality is unfolding in Tigray, so many of the people that I have grown up with, that I have known all my life, have now turned and denied the suffering that is being experienced by me and my family. And they cannot call it fake news because they can see it. And as Mileta mentioned earlier, she said 27,000 youths are now basically vigilantes in Addis, rounding up ethnic Tigrayans. And so to hear that reality from a place that you once called home is very, very distressing. So my question kind of is a bit rhetorical, but really trying to understand what is it that we can actually communicate to people, to these ordinary citizens, to simply stop, because a genocide is not happening because one person deems it to be so, but because ordinary civilians, as Sandra said in her and in her strong testimony about the everyday people that are participating in such an act. And so what is it that takes for us to actually say, and for them to really understand that they cannot participate in such an act, that they all have to be part of a peace process. So that's one of my questions. And another one is looking forward. Is there a material or an educational material that you find exemplary in your works that could be useful? Because obviously throughout all these information that everybody has been sharing, from Darfur to Rwanda to all different places, we're not learning the lessons we need to learn. I mean, there is this metaphorical hate we can talk about, but really, what is it that we can teach so that people become anti-war, really looking into situations when hateful rhetoric is being used and when they're being weaponized, when they are themselves being used as weapons? How do we teach in a way that we can be preventive in the future? So that we don't have to have these conversations in this way. Thank you so much.
Well, I hate to intervene again, but short answer, conflicts are only resolved when they're ripe for solving. And unfortunately, the civil war in Ethiopia is not ripe for solving yet, because it has got enough fuel in it to continue for some time. And that's the blunt reality. Also, I would say, changing hearts and minds is something that takes generations. So changing hearts and minds at the current time to somehow let it help to bring the current conflict to a sudden stop is improbable. It's not going to happen. So, but the way to kind of deal with this, unfortunately, the real world is going to be a military one. Because again, history teaches us that no genocide in history, and I've been repeating this many times, so anyone who will listen has ever been solved through negotiation. If you look at all the genocides since the Nazi times, in a way. So I would say, don't waste your time trying to change every single mindset, because it's not going to work, because the hatred is too deep. What matters is to change the facts on the ground. Now, there's one thing that stimulates a conflict to move faster towards resolution, and that is when it hurts. It's the last thing for me to say, especially in public, that I want anyone to hurt. Certainly not, the opposite. But unfortunately, the hurt in Ethiopia is not symmetrical. You will not have a peace movement in Ethiopia until the vast majority of the people of Ethiopia know the opposite, the consequences of war. Of course, with the expansion of the war out of Tigray to neighboring regions and moving elsewhere, and other conflicts opening up Armenia and elsewhere, more and more ordinary Ethiopians are beginning to understand what war means. This is war with or without genocide. That's not the point here, if you like to see. So in conclusion, I would say this war has to go to its logical conclusion, which is one side has to win and other side has to lose. And the movement for peace will only happen when the conflict is ripe for solving, and that will only happen when the costs of the conflict is much greater and felt personally by vast groups of people all over the country. That's why the importance of sanctions. That's why economic sanctions. That's why all the other means necessary to ensure that the genocidal government in Addis is stopped from using dollars and resources and all its might to wage this genocidal civil war is so important. Because if you don't do that, then the people who are perpetrating this war and their allies who are supporting them, supplying them with weaponry and so on, will obviously continue, and the pain will continue, and the conflict will never be ripe for solving. I don't know if I'm being clear, if you like, but it's extremely important to understand that there is no peaceful solution to a genocide. And only a military solution will work. And that military solution obviously has to be to the removal of the now dictatorial regime because it's under emergency regulation in Addis.
Thank you, Professor Mukesh, and thank you, Hannah, for your really insightful question. Next, we have, I think I need to invite Makonnen Tesfaye for a question. Okay, so I don't think Makonnen is able to, is he joining us?
Quick question. Thank you to all the panelists. It's a question to Professor Mukesh. You have posted a comprehensive account of the ongoing humanitarian crisis and genocide, the genocidal war being waged in Tigray. I think more than 110 scholars and researchers from 21 countries are calling for an end to the war and to end the blockade of food and medicine. Could you tell us a little bit about it? How the world of the scholars or the researchers are actually grappling with the situation in Tigray? Thank you, Professor Mukesh.
I think basically any thinking person or person who's basing their thinking on evidence is coming on the same ground, whether they're journalists collecting evidence on the ground or whether they're researchers who are looking at the data. And one of the most important things that has happened in recent months, I have noticed, is that there are now centers and networks that have grown up who are actually collating the data and using well-known methods that we can use for any other problems, like the pandemic. They are managing to analyze the data to make conclusions which are very difficult to refute. So the contribution of the researchers and scholars is to be able to provide the objective analysis that the journalists and others are collecting, and to lay the foundations, if you like, for a case that can be made. And the case may or may not go anywhere. It may not go beyond the court of public opinion in the near future, but it's fundamentally important in terms of the long-term history out of all this. And so in that sense, my message to everyone would be, and as I think Gabriel was saying earlier, the personal evidence, collating it. You know, when I was dealing with Darfur as a UN coordinator, this was the first time that in the early 2000s, I had just received my BlackBerry, if you like. I could fly over Darfur in my UN plane and take pictures. When I asked the pilot to fly low over a burning village, I could take a photo and I could transmit that photo using the satellite phone of my pilot straight to the office of Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN at the moment in time. And then using geolocation, we could prove that the burning of the villages was not general. In other words, it wasn't a war, like a general war. It was targeted only on those villages that belonged to a particular group. My point of the story is that what is happening now in Tigray is this is no longer a genocide or a conflict that is taking place in darkness. That is, we are learning so much. We know so much. And thanks to the network of all the people, of the investigators, etc. So my message is strengthen those alliances, data gatherers, analysts, journalists, researchers, witnesses on the ground, technologists. Science and technology is on our side, if you like. There is nowhere left for the genocidal authorities in Ethiopia to hide whenever justice is done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wintana, Abdisalam, Dr. Abdisalam, Hanna, and Makonnen for your thought-provoking questions. And to Sandra and Professor Mukesh, thank you for providing your insights. Next, I'd like to welcome one of our brilliant TYN members, fellow Johannes, for the closing remarks.
I look, you don't want to go anymore? Okay. So, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So to mark the 1-year anniversary of the Tigray Genocide, TYN in collaboration with Mechata will hosted strong discussions to clarify the facts behind the genocide perpetrated against the people and nation of Tigray. The goal of this webinar was to commemorate the 1-year anniversary, as I just said, and to present a legal case for the genocide. We had some wonderful speakers today. Forgive me if I can't pronounce your names properly. So firstly, there was Mukesh Kapila, who discussed the long-term effects of genocide on individuals and how there is no way to move on from genocide unless justice is served. He further remarked that putting an end to the genocide, or any genocide in general, is a shared and community obligation. Then we had Sandra, a member of the Rwandan community in the UK, who described her truly awful experience during the genocide in Rwanda. She was only 10 years old. She also explained how that impacted, how the genocide in Rwanda and her experience impacted her whole life. There was a video there was a video on the conflict in southern Sudan as well. So that video discussed, as I said, the conflict in southern Sudan caused by the non-Muslim and non-Arab economic, political, and social dominance. And then we had Milita, who walked through the stages of genocide from classification to denial using example of hate speeches from the Ethiopian government and media. We had Gebra Mariam, who spoke about the victims in Tigray and their difficult situations. And their difficult situations were addressed. So he spoke about gang rape, to the horrible reports of massacres in Tigray by the Amhara militia, known as Fano, Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. He also spoke about how, like, the youngest of these victims, the youngest was 9 years old and the oldest was 72. There was a video from Dr. Etana Dinka, who spoke about the misconception of the Ethiopian empire and the different revolution that occurred in Ethiopia. So today's webinar, we listened to powerful testimonies of people who have experienced genocide in Rwanda, Darfur, Sudan, Bosnia, and Tigray. Please join us for next week at the same time for session 3, which will address genocide recognition, response, and legal procedures for holding perpetrators to account. Thank you for all the panelists, moderators, discussants, and organizers, and thank you to everyone for attending and participating. We hope you will join us for next week's webinar.
Thank you everyone for joining. As Felix said, we hope you all join us for next week's webinar. The subject will be genocide recognition, response, and legal procedures for holding perpetrators to account. Thank you, and I wish you all well.